Alright guys, so let's talk about Argentina today. And every time there's a new president in the White House, we have the same old song and dance. The US will send their Nazgul to various countries to get them to kiss the ring. And this time the eye of Sauron has fallen on Argentina. Scott Bessent went to Argentina to affirm support from Milei, to basically show that the Argentines will work closely with the US and to hopefully once again kick China out. Nothing has fundamentally changed from the previous administration's approach. And what we are seeing in Argentina is a very delicate dance. Milei is actually playing his cards quite well, not to upset the US to get more bailouts from the IMF. Let's not forget, the US has veto powers in the IMF, so Milei has to play nice to get continued support for billions of dollars from the fund. The crisis in Argentina is far from being solved. While money inflation has dropped to 3.2% in the country, the year-on-year reading is still a problem. CPI for March came in at nearly 56%. People's purchasing power is still getting eroded away. Argentine bonds yield less than 15%, so you can't save your way out of this mess. There are some encouraging signs that the economy isn't on the brink of collapse, stable exchange rates are coming back, but the inflation problem is far from over, which means Milei still needs to bring in as much US currency as possible to dollarize his economy. And that would mean making a deal with Scott Bessent to bring the tariffs on Argentina down.
When it comes to the trade negotiations, I'm sure you spoke with President Milei about the 10% rate that Argentina was hit with. Do you think at some point that can come down to zero?
Look, I think we're going to start the negotiations, and just like with everyone else, I'm telling them, bring your A game, we'll see what you got, and we'll go from there.
Can any country go to zero?
We'll see. I don't know what's going to happen with the negotiations because we've got a whole box of things we've got to overcome: tariff, non-tariff trade barriers, currency manipulation, and subsidization of labor and facilities. So there's a big menu there.
So Argentina currently faces a 10% tariff from the US. All their exports, including crude oil, agriculture, they all face an import tax. But notice what Bessent said in the conversation. It's not just tariffs that need to be brought down. If it was, Vietnam would have their punishments taken away. But it's also the non-trade barriers that's on the table. And that includes currency manipulation as well as subsidies given to labor and industrial facilities. But I bet a big card on the table is China. And that's where a ton of Argentina's investments are coming from. We can all recall how weird China-Argentine relations have been. Not only did Milei pull the country out of BRICS, he has also said many weird things. And the big one is not trading or doing business with a communist country. But in January, there was a dramatic U-turn on how Milei now views China, which is very hilarious. It's as if he realized Beijing holds all the cards. And this is even before the global trade war today. Here's the 180. Milei is now seeking deeper ties with China. He has mentioned how we have complementary economies, and the idea is to deepen the commercial relationship. He even wants to visit Beijing, which is a slap to the face to the US. But why the change of heart? Well, we gotta consider the direction of US-China trade in the region. And once again, this revolves around the tariffs and why countries like Argentina, they need the Chinese consumer market more than ever. In 2023, China has been dominating trade within Latin America. With Brazil, they did almost $180 billion worth of business, more than double that of the US. The same thing in bilateral trade with Chile, Peru, and Argentina. And thanks to Trump's trade war, this amount is only going to grow. The US wants to manufacture and grow everything themselves, including farm produce. And that would mean the US importing less from Malay's economy. And with less exports to the US, that would mean fewer dollars earned. That would be a big blow to his plans to dollarize the economy. Trade with China is just one aspect of Malay's dramatic U-turn. Another big carrot he wants is Chinese investments. We talk a lot about China's big trade surplus, and we know a lot of it is being used to buy gold. China is now deploying trillions of RMB to boost domestic demand as well. But Beijing also invests a ton of this money overseas to members of the BRI, of which Argentina is a member. And make no mistake, it's a lot of money to be had, especially for Latin America. This chart shows Chinese foreign direct investments or FDIs into the region from 2003 to 2022. Beijing poured a ton of money into mining projects to help build up each country's economy and to secure their own supply chains as well. Peru is the biggest beneficiary with nearly $15 billion of copper mining projects, but Argentina also received a ton of benefits, almost $6 billion in FDI for gold and lithium production. Argentina sits within the lithium triangle, so there are a ton of resources that can be extracted and sold to make the country rich. The Americans can't afford to do it, especially with Trump in office. So obviously, the only outlet left is the Chinese. They already have an impressive track record in the region. Argentina realizes that they can't abandon China just for the US. Milei has signed with the IMF for a new $20 billion loan, but obviously they need more money to stabilize their economy. And guess who was ready to help? China was ready to help. Argentina had an $18 billion swap line with the Chinese, almost as big as their facility with the IMF, and so far they have used $5 billion worth of it. Even before Bessent went to visit the country, Milei went ahead and renewed it in full for another 12 months, so they can still borrow a full $18 billion when needed. Now, Swapline is very easy to understand. Two central banks come together and both lend each other their own national currency. And after a period of time, they swap back the currencies after paying some interest on it. And in some cases, there might be zero interest rate tagged to the swap line. So the Argentine central bank will swap their peso with the PPOC for $5 billion worth of the Chinese currency. And in this case, it will be 36 billion RMB. China is willing to take the weak peso that will likely lose even more value over time to give up a more valuable currency. And after 3 months, 6 months, or a year, depending on the agreement, the money then gets swapped back. Not many countries are willing to do that because Argentina could always default. They aren't exactly the most stable country in the world. And the Chinese currency has value because it is backed up by Chinese manufacturing industrial machine, from cars to electronics all the way to refined oil. Many countries import Chinese goods in enormous volumes, and the same thing goes with Argentina. 2 years ago, they booked an enormous trade deficit with China, $9.2 billion. They exported only $5.3 billion but imported $14.5 billion worth of stuff. And once again, a trade deficit is nothing wrong. It just shows that the economy prefers to buy from China that frankly exports deflation to the world. And with China's $18 billion swap line facility, Argentina could finance their entire imports from China twice over. And if somehow the peso gets inflated away again, Milei can tap onto the swap line in a hurry and still secure vital imports from Beijing. But here's the funny part, the US can do the same to win over Argentina and other countries. Simply provide a swap line with the Federal Reserve to countries in distress. But the US called the arrangement with China extortionary and they wanted it to end. Even when Bessent went to Argentina, he wasn't really interested in providing Milei with a dollar swap line. In fact, he just went there, made observations on their economy, that's it. So there was no economic rescue given during the visit. And this is another clear example why China is building greater influence around the world while the US simply can't. Beijing provides tangible benefits like investments and swap lines, while the US just provides a lecture and threats. And now that Trump is in office, it's even less likely that this will happen. Trump ran on making America great again, so the optics will be horrible if he went around the world giving foreign countries swap lines and investments. But Argentina desperately needs dollars to stabilize their economy. Trying to bring in investment is extremely difficult today. Thanks to Milei continuing the capital and currency controls, foreign companies face a big problem. They can't send their dividends back home, they are trapped in the country. And why is this happening? Because there simply isn't enough dollars in the economy to stabilize the peso yet. Plus, the reforms aren't exactly done. As a result, they only brought in less than $1 billion worth of investments last year. And China alone accounts for 20% of this amount. That's why having a swap line from either China or the US is critical. China's swap line allows Milei to buy critical imports using the RMB. He can conserve his dollar earnings in the country. So if Bessent really wants to build better relations with Latin America, especially Argentina. Providing a swap line is mission critical, but will he? Because it would go against US foreign policy. While China has a goal of building influence through economic strength, the US is keeping the biggest benefit to countries allied to them. The Federal Reserve has an unlimited swap facility with the G7 nations, and this includes Canada, the UK, EU, and Japan, so they can swap as much of their local currency for dollars. But here's the funny thing, their currencies are really quite stable enough, and there really isn't a need for a swap line. The real countries that need the help are places like Argentina that have a currency crisis. But for a variety of reasons, Bessent just refused to give one, part of which is to reward friends and punish the rest, divide and conquer. But another reason is the optics it will give Trump when his trade war is not going well. According to CAP, even though Trump paused his tariffs, the baseline rate of 10% will still hit American households. It will cost families at least $4,600 in additional costs every single year. And if the US gives Argentina a swap line, it would cause higher inflation, especially if Milei decides to swap pesos for dollars and suddenly defaults. Now the supply of dollars have increased with nothing to show for it. The US itself is already grappling with higher inflation from the tariffs. Bessent himself is trying to sell the idea that inflation from the tariffs is just a one-time event, but is that really the case?
Let me ask you about your view, because last January you wrote that, quote, tariffs are inflationary. The Fed chair said the same thing on Friday, that tariffs announced this week cause higher inflation. Have you expressed any concerns to President Trump directly that his tariff policy could be inflationary?
No, what I've said is tariffs are a one-time price adjustment. So there's a big difference between insipid, endemic inflation within the system and consistent price level increases and a one-time adjustment. Energy prices, the drop in interest cost, I think real after-tax wages are going to go up for Americans, and that's what's important.
How can it be? It just doesn't make sense here. Tariffs are not a one-time price increase. It's a big bump to an inflation problem that won't go away. It's a big reason why the US can't afford to go around the world and just give swap lines. Their own domestic issues are enormous, and this entire tariff war is a big mess. And this will leave the way open for China not just in Argentina, but for the whole of Latin America as well. But let me know what you think. Will Argentina abandon China for the US? And what was the point of Bessent even heading there in the first place? Let me know in the comments below. Stay safe. Be sure to smash the like button and subscribe as we navigate through these crazy times.